The open list system is a great advantage for democracy, and the single districts, provinces and single districts, really are moving the political process towards greater transparency, greater accountability. But along with all this, I want to talk about some of the problems that the next government will face. First of all, sectarianism. It's still a political reality. Some of the political groups are trying to disguise it under a new rhetoric. We have new names for political parties that project a more national image. But the sectarian fears, mutual ambition, or conflicting ambitions are still under the surface. And they are still ultimately what governs the relationship between the political groups. If you look at the two major coalitions, the coalition of the Prime Minister Maliki, the state of law, and the coalition that is led by the Supreme Council, they really are Shia groups with token Sunni participation. If you look at all the names that are in there, and you look at the platform when they make the announcements, those are Shia parties with only a sprinkling of Sunnis. The Tawafuq is an unabashedly Sunni group. The Kurds, of course, run on their own platform, and really the only two lists in the coming elections that can claim to be balanced between Sunni and Shia are the lists of Jawad Boulani, the current Minister of Interior, and Ali Allawi, who was the former Prime Minister. Other than that, you do not have truly balanced Sunni-Shia lists. So sectarianism and all the tensions that arise from it is still an undercurrent, and I think can still undermine the political process, because Sunni and Shia have very different interpretations of what the state should be like, what the identity of the state is. And apropos of this, I don't think talking about a Shia government is very helpful to this process and to reconciliation between Shia and Sunnis and bringing them together on a shared vision of what the state is, because so long as we continue to talk about the Shia government, then we are defining it in sectarian terms, both within Iraq and to the outside world. And I think this is a major problem that the US government ought to be thinking about. Another very threatening element is the weak institutions of the state. More than 6 years after the war and 3.5 years of the current government, Iraq cannot be said to have institutions or a truly functioning state. And the Iraqi people are getting extremely unhappy about this. The voter turnout in January for the provincial elections was merely 51%, which was a great disappointment to the political groups, and really is a signal that the population at large is losing credibility in the state and the functioning of the state. And when I say the state, I don't just mean the Maliki government, I mean the government, the executive branch, and the parliament. There are the trappings of statehood, constitution, elected parliament, and so on, but far greater energy is today invested by the political elite in acquiring and consolidating their own power and prerogatives than in building institutions and ensuring that the parts of the state work together in harmony and as a whole. Most ministries don't function properly. Parliament has been paralyzed over numerous issues and has been extremely unproductive. There is mutual hostility between ministries, between the government and the parliament, and the Prime Minister and the Presidential Council, and this has been a theme for the last 3.5 years. The state really is fairly dysfunctional. There's a lot of ad hoc decision-making, a lot of mismanagement, and nowhere is this lack of institutionalization, the lack of the inability to make things work together and fit in together. Nowhere is it more dangerous than in the security sector. We saw that in the explosions that occurred, the double explosions that occurred in October, there was mutual blaming, mutual recriminations between the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Defense, the Prime Minister's office, And each one of them blamed the other because each one claimed that the job of securing Baghdad was not theirs, but belonged to somebody else. This kind of disorganization in the system cannot but undermine the security at times when the insurgency hasn't died out. A third problem is the lack of definition of what the state is, what are its characteristics. There is no common agreement as to what Iraq is. We have a constitution, but the constitution within it carries a clause that says it should be amended. The amendments should have happened a long time ago, and in fact there has been a constitutional review committee functioning for the last 3 years. It presented its last report last June, and yet many of the cardinal issues that divide Iraq have not been resolved either within the Constitution or by the Constitutional Review Committee. There are tensions between provinces and national government, among the provinces themselves, certainly between the national government and the Kurdish regional government. There are problems over either overlapping authorities or undefined authorities. There are tensions in the distribution of resources and so on. And the Kurdish issue, of course, absolutely encapsulates all these question marks about the nature of the Iraqi state. It is a byproduct, although the Kurdish region is recognized by everyone as a federated area within the greater Iraq, but there is no consensus on the degree of federation, the degree of authority, the degree of powers, the distribution of resources between that Kurdish area and the rest of Iraq. But the same is true of all parts of Iraq, including the provinces. There was a provincial powers law that was passed in 2008, and already both the provinces, the provincial councils, and the national government are already looking in that law and saying this is not a sufficiently clear law, that there are areas that still need to be revisited. Somebody has already touched on the question of Iraq's relationship with the region, and first of all, of course, Iran and Turkey are now, there's hardly ever an absence of either Turkish delegations or Iranian delegations, or vice versa. Iraq is going to Turkey and Iran. Whether this constitutes influence, overt, covert, as Ambassador Corbin said, certainly because of the weak government in Baghdad, there is a power vacuum in Iraq. And this power vacuum will be filled. And there are competing regional agendas that wish to fill that power vacuum, be it Turkey, be it Iran, being some of the GCC countries, notably Saudi Arabia, Syria. The Iraqis often accuse several of these countries of interfering in its affairs, but in the end, until and unless there is a competent and capable Iraqi government, the invitation to interference is always going to be there. Finally, there again is the perception here in Washington that for the moment our attention should be on Afghanistan. But I'd like to posit that in fact the future of the region, of the Middle East region, is not in Afghanistan, but it can be in Iraq. And that the way that Iraq goes is going to determine how this region goes. Well, the impact of what Iraq does or fails to do is going to reverberate through the region in a way that Afghanistan will not necessarily do so. And so the horizon is 2005, I guess, not 2020, but the next government will have a lot of challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much.